So the government remains shut down. But there is an issue that is looming that will derail Democrats, and that is the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. And it feeds more than 40 million people. And guess what? It's running out on November 1st. You know what that means? Missed paychecks, canceled infrastructure projects, and mass firings haven't yet convinced these Democrats to change their government shutdown strategy. But now they're facing down another pressure point, threatening a program they've long championed, benefiting millions of Americans. So let me explain this before Louis and Raynard join the conversation. And welcome to the Armstrong Williams Show. Thank you for joining us. The Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, which helps feed more for the million, will start to run on November 1st, as I said. Now, Trump, USDA is warning. At least 25 states, that's half this country, plans to cut off benefits starting on that date. And you know what those states include? Big time California, the overwhelmingly Democratic state with 4.5 million SNAP recipients. SNAP. The food and the cliff has largely flown under the radar as Democrats focus on another November 1st development. And the launch of an open enrollment for Affordable Care Act insurance plans in most states, they believe massive premium hikes prompted by expiration of key federal subsidies will compel Republicans to relent and negotiate an extension at that time. But you know, Louis, Martinez with the Washington Correspondent for NTD, I don't think so. Your thoughts?
Well, I was listening to John Fetterman yesterday, and he laid it out at least for his state, right? So there's 2 million people in Pennsylvania that need SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, and only 426,000 Pennsylvanians that actually benefit from the ACA healthcare tax premiums. So that's simple math. It's going to hurt more Democrat constituents to continue the shutdown than it is for Republicans to actually concede to the outrageous demands from Senate and House Democrats. So, and you mentioned it, 40 million nationwide depend on SNAP. Only 22 million nationwide actually benefit from the healthcare tax premiums that will expire at the end of the year. And also, those tax premiums will see healthcare costs rise for 22 million Americans by 18, 15, even 20% in certain states, which is, of course, very important for the pockets of those 22 million Americans receiving the benefit. But you have 1.5 million active duty military personnel who might not get a paycheck next month. You have 750,000 federal workers who are furloughed. And then you have pretty much any other, the Women, Infant, and Children Assistance Program, which is right now only running because of funds reallocated by the Trump administration. So I think the math is not going to turn out so well for Democrats if they keep on going with this shutdown. I think that the Schumer minority leadership in the Senate, ran its course on appeasing its base and doing something. And obviously, the only thing Democrats could do right now in Congress is force a shutdown because they don't have any other cards to play. But I think it's going to backfire by midterms next year.
So, Raynard, let me throw you a curveball because I know, aside from being the intellectual that you are, you also love sports. I was stunned when the FBI indicted 41 NBA players, including Chauncey Billups and Terry Rozier, guess what? In a federal gambling-related investigation.
Sean, this is crazy. They're dealing with some serious mob families.
Oh.
These are no street guys. And there's going to be a lot of pressure on the NBA as well as the NFL to back away from this legalized gambling because this thing cannot be put back in the bottle, and a lot of players are gambling at astronomical numbers. And the biggest fear, if I'm the NBA commissioner right now, is when you start getting into discovery and you see these players' text messages to these mob families and other players who are not A-list stars in the league, when you start seeing how pervasive gambling is within the player community, this is devastating for the NBA.
Let me tell you something. Cash Patel, who's the director of FBI, they're not playing.
No, not at all. And again, Armstrong, I really don't understand why pro sports and college sports ever allow gambling to seep into
Did they
their
not see
sport.
this coming?
Exactly. Great point.
You know, is Maduro illegitimate brother?
Oh, well, yeah, and the U.S., the European Union, and most countries around the world that have any sort of respectable democracy have attested that the 2019 presidential elections in Venezuela were completely fraudulent. And right now, in the Panamanian National Bank, in the vaults, are the actual proof, the evidence of the ballots of how the opposition and Edmundo Gonzalez, obviously supported by Maria Corina Machado, who just won the Nobel Peace Prize, were the actual winners of that presidential election. And I think the Trump administration has already put the Maduro regime on notice and is just going through the motions to prove also to the American audience and to the world that this regime is illegitimate. It's a threat to national security of the U.S., and it's a threat to the stability of the entire region through its support of narco-terrorist and cartel organizations all over Latin America that have now been proved to have links with Hezbollah, that have been armed by Russians, that have also ties with illegal crime groups from the Chinese, sponsored by the Chinese Communist Party. So the Maduro regime is just the tip of the iceberg of this issue, and we just saw that with the most recent strike that the U.S. military conducted in the Eastern Pacific. And if we look at the map, and we know that the drug trade can come out either from Venezuela through the South Caribbean Sea up to the United States or towards Europe, or in the Eastern Pacific, it would go out of Colombia, out of Ecuador, up to Mexico and across the border illegally. It just shows how that entire region is right now being consumed and controlled by the cartels. Like, Colombia used to be the strongest military ally of the United States in the region, and right now it has its first left-leaning president in history, who was a former guerrilla member, who has allowed Colombia to, after 60 years of combating drugs, be producing the most cocaine ever in history. So clearly it has infiltrated all levels of the Colombian government, and that is why the Trump administration reduced their security guarantees and aid to that country.
Raynard, Trump just placed huge sanctions on the biggest Russian oil company. What has changed?
Oh, well, number one, notice that India no longer is buying oil from Russia. And this is sweeping through Europe because a lot of European countries were buying oil from Putin in Russia, and yet they're supporting Ukraine. Make it make sense. And so through the sheer amount of pressure President Trump has put on the European countries, they are isolating Russia and cutting off their funding by getting all these other countries to buy their oil from the U.S., thus our presence in South America. Because I'm going to tell you something, Armstrong, be looking for either Secretary of State Marco Rubio to go to Venezuela or a high-level envoy. They've already told this guy he's got to go. It's almost like Colin Powell when he went to Haiti and said, hey, you got to leave walking upright or you're going to leave in a body bag. Your choice. And Maduro is gone. His days are numbered, period.
You know, you spoke of John Fetterman. He also said this week, talk about nuking the filibuster and how hypocritical the Democrats are.
Yeah, he actually mentioned that most Democrats in the last midterm elections campaigned on the idea of nuking the filibuster. Of course, John Fetterman, a Democrat from Pennsylvania, drew the line that he's suggesting that he would support if Republicans did this only to reopen government. And we also already know that Republicans did that also for low-level executive nominees, not from cabinet nominees from the President Trump. So it is resulting to be an option if you want to keep governing, especially if you have, Senate Democrats who don't want to play ball with things that historically have been normal bipartisan, like low-level executive nominees, like keeping the government open. Like, I think it's ridiculous that we're in a government shutdown and the American people are suffering, where the continuing resolution that's on the table has already been voted for 13 times in the past. So there's really no reason, except for obviously Democrats wanting to appease their base and pretend that they're actually doing something. So yeah, I think nuking the filibuster is an option on the table. I don't think Republicans are going to pick it up. I think John Thune, the Senate Majority Leader, has proven to be an honorable man and wanting to go through the motions.
Honorable. You still have honor and confidence. I'm glad to hear you reminded American people we have honor. You know, our president is really a tale of two cities. I don't see any redeeming value except for this person themselves, why he would commute the sentence of George Santos. I don't. It's baffling, you know.
I have no logic behind that move. There was nothing political to gain. It wasn't like anyone argued that Santos was unfairly prosecuted and convicted, so that's not an issue.
Stealing from his campaign, wire fraud.
Yeah.
I mean, it goes on and on and on and on.
Yeah, so.
And he was a bad liar.
Right, exactly, exactly. This was all about, I think, Marjorie Taylor Greene, the congresswoman from Georgia, using her personal relationship with the president because she and Santos were very close personally. I think she cashed in a chip with Trump to get him to do that.
You know, my man, this is so hard. I want to control my heart when I bring this up. The demolition of the East Wing of the White House. Have you seen the videos? Have you seen the demolition of history? I assumed they were just going to add on. I didn't know it was going to look like the World Trade Center and some terrorist attack happened, but it was not a terrorist attack. The White House ordered it. Your thoughts?
Well, I think that at least the public, as it was seen on mainstream media, were misled. At no point was it said that they were going to demolish parts of the East Wing. Of course, there's the argument that the Trump administration makes that every president in the past has done something to renovate the White House. Of course, there's also the argument that they're using private funds to do this.
History, brother.
No,
history.
No, that's where I'm going. Like, so, but at no point, like, I don't know the details, but I'm
you do
assuming,
know the details. You know enough.
I'm assuming some historical society, or there should
totally
be some process to get a permit to actually demolish the way that it's being demolished, and that seems to have been bypassed. And of course, the news cycle has every week something new to capture the attention of the American people. But of course, this will remain in history. That image of the bulldozing of the West Wing.
Bulldozing. Raynard.
But Armstrong, isn't this a great metaphor for Trump's 2 terms in office?
Chaos?
Well, no. He's upsetting the establishment and the status quo. Because.
But what does that have to do with the demolition?
Very easily.
Demolition
no
of the
one's
White
touched the White House to that extent since the 1900s. Trump is transforming all these relics of the past.
Yeah, but are you defending him now? You don't have an issue.
I don't have a problem with it.
You don't? Okay.
No. I'm not a big history buff in the sense of European architecture.
I will say, to Raynard's point, if somehow the Trump administration found a loophole to go through with this without needing whatever proper authorization it needed, then it would be a perfect example of the Trump administration just finding a way around.
Where is Congress? Where are they?
But because he's using private funds, I think that's the loophole there.
I think what we're going to find is that the president could not make this decision. This is not his decision to make. Of course, I respect the president, but I don't think any of us should not see fault in the president, because the only way for the president to be better is for us to hold him accountable on things that we absolutely disagree with, like George Santos and the demolition of the White House. I think that's what makes our country greater. You cannot have everybody in the president's ear telling him, oh yeah, do whatever you want to do whatever you want to. No. Right. Then that's no longer a democracy.
Well, but the Democrats got to do a better job than going DEFCON 10 on everything he does.
We're only talking about the demolition of the White House. That's all we're talking about. We're not talking about any other issues here. I know you want to defend them. But we're only talking about the demolition of the White House. Well, and on that note,
okay,
I'm going to take a break. I'm going to thank you, Louis. They sometimes just can't help themselves. I need to be balanced. We'll be back. Bruce Fein is a regular with Fein and Delvalle, and James Robbins is the Dean of Academics, IMP Senior Fellow of National Security at American Foreign Policy Council, and Paul O'Sullivan, my man from South Africa, the author of the book Stop Me If You Can, a former board member at Airports Company South Africa. Let me start with Paul. The word genocide was born from the Holocaust, and certainly its meaning has evolved over time. And when people speak of genocide, Paul, they like referring to what the Israelis have been doing in Gaza. But man, if you just stop and pause at what's going on in Darfur, the Sudan, the Congo, the proportion of that genocide makes what's going on in Gaza and Israel like a walk in the park. But yet, the media's fascination and their definition with genocide, everything starts and ends with Israel. Why?
Well, I think, first of all, you have to remember that the situation in Israel, by the way, my late father was in the Palestine police in Israel. Well, it was then called Palestine. It was part of the British protectorate, if you want to call it that. They went in there during World War I to put the Germans out, and they took over the whole of Palestine. So there's a long history in Palestine or Israel or whatever you want to call it, the Holy Land, I call it. And what you have to remember is in Africa, genocide takes place on a regular basis. But Africa is out of the limelight. It's not being seen by the rest of the world. When all the hoo-ha started with COVID-19, which was a shocking thing. And of course, I'm not likening it to genocide, but all the hoo-ha with COVID-19. In the first year of COVID-19, there were still more people dying of malaria and war and genocide in Africa. Now, unfortunately, everyone has a different, well, not everyone, but different groups have different understandings of what genocide might be. Now, anybody that's looking at what's been going on in Israel and Gaza and the West Bank would have seen, without a doubt, on the 7th of October, a tragic event unfolding, which happened so rapidly, it caught everybody unawares. And there's no doubt in my mind that that was and would fit the definition of genocide, because those people were out to kill as many Jewish citizens as they could. And not just to kill them, but to kill them as horribly as they could. And if you look at the examples of acts of genocide, one of the examples is killing members of any particular group, a targeted group, with the intention to destroy the targeted group. Now, if you listen to the talk that comes out of countries like Iran and other like-minded people, they talk about wiping the Jewish state out. So they're talking about genocide, clearly. Now, on the other side of the coin, a country like Israel, with its IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, they go in to Gaza, and as far as they're concerned, it's full-on war. And clearly, when you see all these children suffering, how do you involve children in a war? And it seems there's a balancing act needed. As you would know, South Africa, the government of South Africa, took a decision to go to the International Criminal Court and file charges of genocide against Israel. And even though they're currently with a ceasefire or truce, or they're trying to make peace there at the moment, South Africa has made it clear that they're going to continue with the genocide claims against Israel. And the unfortunate thing is that the South African government didn't also bring genocide claims against Hamas. Because, what do we say? 6 of one and half a dozen of the other, except who started it. But does that make it right then to go ahead and do these things just because it's being done to you? And if you look at the Second World War, everyone talks about the 6 million Jewish people that were murdered by the Nazi regime. But they didn't just pick on Jews. They also picked on mentally handicapped people. They picked on gypsies. If you were a gypsy, a Romani gypsy, you were straight into that gas chamber. And actually, at one stage, they then started picking on Catholics. And that would worry me because I'm a Catholic. So the reality is, when you have a mindset of a race or a nation where they legislate, because that's what they did in Nazi Germany, they legislated the removal of the Jews. Now, that's clearly genocide. There can be no doubt.
So let me get Bruce. You're chopping at the bit.
Yeah.
To
I think that's a wonderful presentation, but I think it's incomplete. Let me start. The definition of genocide is enshrined in the Genocide Convention in 1948. We're signatories. It became effective in 1951. And in the evolution of the definition, there was an effort to include killings based upon political differences, self-determination, as an act of genocide. It was voted down because the big powers understood they were doing that every day when they attacked each other. And so in order to qualify for genocide, you have to attempt to exterminate in whole or in part a group, not because they're handicapped, not because they like Beethoven, but because of their race, religion, ethnicity, or nationality. If it's not that motivation, it doesn't mean it's innocent. It could still be a crime against humanity, but it is not genocide. That is the international definition of genocide. It doesn't evolve. Moreover, in the Genocide Convention, it says, if anyone wants to make a claim against genocide, they need to file it for the International Court of Justice. And that is a 15-member court that sits in The Hague. That is what South Africa did. Now, the reason why South Africa could not accuse Hamas of genocide is because under the International Court of Justice, it only entertains suits between nations, and Hamas is not a nation. So that's the reason why you say this is, hair splitting, but that was thought very important when the Genocide Convention was being discussed and ratified. So if you are attacking a country out of political reasons, you want self-determination, you want power, it could be a crime against humanity, but it's not genocide, because they voted particularly on politically inspired killings and said, no, it's not genocide. So when Joseph Stalin slaughters all the kulaks and whatever, and all his opponents in the Soviet Union, it isn't genocide, but it's crime against humanity, like Mao Zedong in China in the Cultural Revolution. Anyway, we just need to keep our terms separate.
What do you call what's going on in Africa then, in your definition?
No, I think, for example, the International Criminal Court did indict Omar Bashir for genocide in Darfur. I think some of the killings in Africa constitute genocide, and in fact, have been held to have been genocide. Some of the things Gaddafi had been doing. Other killings are politically motivated, and they wouldn't be genocide. But you have to make those distinctions. It doesn't mean that we exonerate, excuse me?
Boko Haram in Nigeria?
Are those, my view is that if they're picking out opponents like Biafrans for religion, it would be genocide.
Yes.
But remember, that would not go to the ICJ because Boko Haram is not a nation. They're not a state. Only the ICJ entertains suits between nations. Now, you can charge individuals before the International Criminal Court on an individual basis, and that could go forward. I myself have filed numerous charges before the International Criminal Court, mainly relating to Nigerian individuals. And those, you take Boko Haram and the Fulani, they are picking out Biafrans because their ethnicity and religion, and I do agree that it qualifies for genocide. I believe that also happened in the 1967-70 Civil War in Biafra. They were picked out, the Biafrans, because of their ethnicity and said, we want to destroy you, starve you to death, 2 or 3 million died.
Wow. So Jim Robbins, how does language, listening to this, by the way, influence our moral and political response to what is absolute evil? And has propaganda weakened the power of the world itself?
Oh, absolutely. I completely agree that there is a legal definition that's enshrined under the Genocide Convention, and that we should stick to that to the extent possible. However, in the political world and in the propaganda world, the word genocide has kind of taken on a life of its own. And it was from the beginning, the Hamas and its supporters were saying that what's going on in Gaza is genocide, maybe not under the strict definition that we find under the Genocide Convention, and which again is the proper definition. But in a political world, it's evolved. It's just kind of taken on its own life. And so they'll show pictures of the destruction in Gaza, pictures of people being killed and whatnot, and say that that's genocide. Well, it really isn't, because Israel has taken a number of steps to try to limit collateral damage, to limit civilian deaths. They warn people if they're going to attack in a certain place. There's nothing in the Israeli strategy or in their statements that they're out there to wipe out an entire people, the Palestinians or the Gazans. I mean, they're after Hamas. And on the other hand, Hamas has done everything it can to increase the civilian casualties. They dug their network of terror bunkers underneath populated areas, putting the headquarters under schools and under hospitals and whatnot. When Israel warns that they're going to be moving into a certain area, you have the terrorists out there actually stopping people and say, no, you can't move out of here, because the human shield technique is something that Hamas wants to use. They actually benefit from the people that they're supposedly defending getting killed. When the food aid comes in, they hijack it and then they sell it on the black market. I mean, it's very cynical. But all of this is intended to create the conditions whereby they can charge Israel with genocide. And again, it doesn't really fit the legal definition under the Genocide Convention, but it does fit a political definition which they have been using to their advantage. And these are things that take on a life of their own. If you don't have discussions like this that afford the sort of corrective measures to look at what are the real categories of genocide, what does it actually entail? And when you compare back to the Holocaust in World War II, which is where the term originated, and the intentionality of the Nazis and the systematic nature of what they did, we can go through that whole history, but just the mechanical heartlessness of what went on in the Nazi period, where they were just rounding up whole populations of people who were minding their own business, just trying to live, and then they just rounded them up and exterminated them. That's not what we're seeing right now. But in any case where you have large-scale death and destruction for whatever reason, and in this case, it's just the consequence of a very tightly contained urban type of combat, you're going to get charges of genocide that are raised on a political level by people who just, they're on one side and they have a bone to pick, and so that's what they're going to say.
And we'll be back. Don't go away. That's what this is really nice.
It is easier to build up strong children than to try and repair broken men.
The streets are plagued with crime, violence. There's a lot of poverty, and it's all a result of lack of education that's happening in our schools. So it really is a crisis.
We come from very different political perspectives, but we've come to the same conclusion, and that is there is a crisis in the classroom. Children are being deprived of quality of life because they're being deprived of a good education. We must solve this problem. It's incumbent upon all of us to join hands together to get this done.
We can't afford to wait one more day before we address these issues, because every day we lose another child.
Let's stop the politicking. Let's stop the games. Let's really do something to give these kids a real chance at life and being a part of that American dream.
we need accountability for funding. Many of the districts where you're seeing very low test scores, students graduating with very low literacy and math comprehension rates, they are receiving a lot of funding. So where is the money going where our kids aren't being adequately educated?
If you believe every child is deserving of a quality education, please go to educationjusticefoundation.com.
Before I go to Raynard, you had something you wanted to say.
Yes, that it was the Israeli, first of all, the definition of genocide includes creating conditions of life calculated to destroy people in whole or in part. The Israeli defense minister has stated openly, the siege will include no water, no food. They are animals and we shall treat them as such. If you have a siege, there's no water, no food, you're going to try to kill people because you can't survive without water or food. So his suggestion that there's no evidence that suggests that was their motivation is wrong. He was the defense minister, and it's not been repudiated by any other member of the cabinet. Can you survive without water or food? That's his definition of the siege.
So you're pushing back on our guest.
Yeah, because he didn't explain the other side.
Well, we're going to give him a chance. But here's what I'm saying here. Obviously, this is an education for everybody today and remind us of sometimes of things that we can overlook in history. But how does the media judge what they cover? It seems to me if there's mass killings in Darfur or the Sudan or the Congo or anywhere, the media would want to bring attention to that. How do they pick and choose what they cover to give more importance over something else? And they did this. The worst part, by the way. Not one protest have I seen. They claimed before this uprising on college campuses around the world, in London, in Paris, all across the United States, was because Israel was committing genocide against Palestinians in Gaza. All of a sudden, there's a ceasefire. There's not one protest celebrating and acknowledging the ceasefire, nor do you see these same protesters protesting is what is real genocide around the world.
Yeah. I mean, Armstrong, you travel around the world, and I know, Bruce, you do. America is kind of the least informed globally on global issues. I mean, we're at the bottom of the totem pole there. I've done a lot of work in South Sudan and Sudan. I've been to Nigeria and Niger when they're in the middle of conflicts. I've been up north in Nigeria with Boko Haram, you were talking about, the Christian South. And I tell you, Armstrong, the discussion we're having right now is a more philosophical discussion embedded in legal action, nation state to nation state. I think we can all agree that whether it's genocide, murder, or let's call it a human tragedy, regardless of what title we put on it. And I think, getting to your question about the media has got to stop pushing agendas and just state the fact and have people like Bruce on to give it context. That's what I think the American media is missing. Even when they cover stories like this, they don't have people who can bring context to the conversation.
Let me go back to Paul Sullivan. I'm going to give you the chance to respond to all that you've heard. It does seem that international justice seems to punish some nations and protect others. And can any country truly claim moral authority when its own record is flawed? And then what lessons from Nuremberg still apply in today's conflicts? It depends upon where the conflict is.
Well, it's a hard one, Armstrong. What you have to remember is that if you, obviously I talk from an African perspective. If you look at Africa, Africa is a fairly large continent. And unfortunately, a lot of Africa is in a post-colonial stage where they still have these colonial ties. Now, unfortunately, you haven't got the same quality and quantity of media roaming around in Africa So you can get away with things in Africa that you just wouldn't get away with in other parts of the world. And when it comes to definition of course, there's a legal definition for genocide. But I can tell you now, the legal definition for genocide in terms of the 1948 convention, the United Nations Convention, the legal definition is quite narrow, and it doesn't cover situations. I mean, you go back to the 90s, you had the Bosnian Wars going on. Now, during the Bosnian Wars, there was clear genocide going on there, but it wasn't necessary until the United Nations stepped in. I think it was British and American troops went in to stop the genocide. But that doesn't happen in Africa. You won't see swarms of troops coming from other countries to stop genocide in Africa. You will see in what I would class as the Western world, and there's a big debate about what constitutes the Western world and what constitutes the Eastern world, and that itself is probably a colonial term, with London sitting in the middle, and everything that's east of London was classed as east, and everything west was west. Now, the reality is that genocide exploits or exposes the evil in human beings. And as a criminologist, I can tell you that probably 10% of the population are geared towards committing crime. They have no problem with committing crime. And of that 10% again, which is 1% of the population, are quite happy to commit sadistic, violent, murderous crime. And when that 1% of your population becomes 2% or 3%, and they are part of an army of a country that's conquering other countries, you end up with a situation where the conditions are ripe for genocide. And I don't believe, of course, there are allegations of Israel committing genocide in Gaza. My personal feeling, this is just my opinion, I don't believe that Israel has intentionally committed genocide. They've been reckless in some regards, but I don't believe they've intentionally gone out there to wipe out as many Arabs as they want to, as they would like to. I don't think that's clearly not the case. If you flip the coin and look at what Hamas do, it's inbred by Hamas. That they've got the IDF were able to get some of the messages that were sent to the people that committed these atrocities on October the 7th, 2 years ago. And they were told, kill as many Jews as you can. Now that is apparently not a definition of genocide, but I see it as genocide. They went out to kill as many Jews as they could.
Just hold that point. You want to challenge.
Yeah, first of all, the leadership of Hamas has been indicted for genocide by the International Criminal Court for the precise reasons that you've stated. And remember, the International Criminal Court, unlike the International Court of Justice, does have jurisdiction over individuals. Secondly, with regard to proving intent, this was the defense minister of Israel, not disputed by anyone else, that the purpose and goal and architect of the siege would be to deny any Palestinian food, water, electricity, etc., etc. You cannot survive without food or water.
Hold that point. How would you respond, Paul?
Well, I think that if you look at the act and the definition.
Wait a second, Paul. I'm sorry. What were you going to say, Jim?
I just want to say that when the defense minister said that these are human animals, he was referring to Hamas. He was not referring to everybody in Gaza. This is also 2 days after October 7th, when everybody was very upset. So, of course, what are you going to say?
No.
What were people in the United States saying after December 7th, 1941, or after 9/11? People said a lot of things.
No.
But this guy was referring to Hamas. I'm seeing the videos of
Jill, wait a
Hamas.
second. So you
can't have a seat.
Human animals. They are human animals.
So you disputing what he's saying?
I'm thinking it's incomplete because you can't have a siege that only affects Hamas. When you deny the entire Gaza population of food and water, you can't
live. We're going to go to break. We'll be back. This is getting a little excited in here. It should be. Okay.
As a home buyer, you need a lender who cares about your home ownership dreams. United Security Financial has been helping families secure their dream homes for 30 years. We're a national fair practice lender that provides affordable mortgages and low down payment programs to eligible home buyers. To learn how United Security Financial can help you secure your dream home, call 1-800-373-4186.
They're still talking. But anyhow, James, finish your point, please.
My point is, with respect to that single statement said in the heat of the moment, and against the terrorists who had been, beheading babies and other things, and with respect to the food and water in wartime, in a situation where Hamas was using the people of Gaza, the innocent people of Gaza, as human shields. This one statement is not proof of genocide. I mean, it's ridiculous to suggest that when you look at the entirety of Israel's conduct of this war, in which they have tried to minimize civilian casualties, and it's been Hamas, the human animals, who have been trying to maximize civilian casualties.
You're kind. You refer to them as animals. I call them savages, but thank you for showing more sympathy than me, because what they did on that day was savagery. I'm just sorry. Let me go back to Paul. You were adding, go ahead.
Yeah, so what I wanted to say, if you look at the definition, and I'm sorry I can't remember our colleague's name.
Bruce.
Top right-hand corner there.
Bruce.
If you look at the definition in terms of the act, or the convention, should I say, it says, deliberately inflicting conditions of life calculated to bring about physical destruction. Now, I'm not defending any side against another, but if somebody says we're going to shut off the water and shut off the electricity and to flush people out as an act of, if you're engaged in war and you want to flush people out, you cut off the aid, you cut off the water, you cut off the electricity, and then you have a tactical advantage during a war. Would that necessarily constitute genocide? I don't know. I wouldn't be happy.
When you're targeting non-combatants, the answer is yes.
Is it genocide to you, Paul? Would you consider it genocide from your experience?
Me?
Yes.
No, I wouldn't, because if you're...
Okay, hold there. James, would you consider it genocide?
If it's conducted against enemies in wartime, then it's not genocide.
Bruce?
When it's conducted against civilians who are not involved in any battlefield violence, it is genocide.
They're always involved in the battlefield of violence. They're the ones that die. What are you talking about?
Are you kidding? The babies in incubators who are starving to death, they're engaged in battlefield violence?
You missed my point. They're the victims of this war. Yeah. They're the casualties.
Right, and the reason why they're casualties, they're dying because there's no food and water, electricity or drugs or otherwise. They're tens of thousands. They're probably undercounted because you don't have journalists over there. It's not a free, open society for people who can walk in there. The number is probably highly understated, and plus, for good or for ill, the Genocide Convention says the definition will be determined by the International Court of Justice. And that definition, according to the International Court of Justice, they could get it wrong, has been satisfied in this particular case.
I want to interject this into this conversation. I don't think we can ever look at any place in the United States where someone can accuse us of genocide. Now, there are many parts of the world, Russia, China, the Middle East, you make those accusations. Obviously, we have elevated ourselves to a level where these things don't happen here. What is it that is so different that these other places where clearly, when you talk about what Stalin and Pol Pot and Mao Zedong. I mean, it was clearly. And what happened in Romania? Ceausescu. So what is it? What is so different now, Paul, with these regimes today?
Well, first of all, I just want to, without making any accusations, the conditions that enabled the Pol Pot regime to do what they did, those conditions were created by the Vietnam War. Now,
in the United States, you can say it. I knew exactly where you were going. Yeah. I mean, I'm not going to argue that.
That's a fact of reality. If the Vietnam War had not have happened, in other words, if you didn't have Mao Zedong sending troops into North Vietnam to go down and take over South, so you have this proxy war between North and South Vietnam. And that war was a vicious war. It lasted a very long time. And it was that Vietnamese war that created the enabling conditions for the Pol Pot regime to do what they did. And if the Vietnamese War hadn't taken place, I doubt very much Pol Pot would have got away with what he was doing. He exploited, like any narcissist would, he exploited the opportunity and did exactly what he did. And the same happens if you allow the conditions to prevail. Famous Irish personality, Edmund Burke, he said, it's up to the good people in the world to stop the bad people from taking over, or words to that effect. The triumph of evil is based on civilization acting civilized. And if we all act civilized, then you're probably not going to have genocide taking place. But unfortunately, when countries allow themselves to be led by a narcissist or a dictator or a fascist, they end up following that fascist, and you end up in a point. Now we have social media, by the way. Social media is so dangerous to creating the conditions where narcissistic people can rise up, and they rise up quickly. And I won't be at all surprised if during our lifetime we're going to see other incidents of genocide, because people who are narcissistic have become into positions of power.
James, Robbins?
A person who's not narcissistic would not do that.
So, James, is international law a tool for peace or a form of control? And what role should the media play in keeping justice consistent and fair?
Well, international law is interesting because it wants to be like normal law, but it's not, because there's really no enforcement mechanism, and it's highly politicized, and sometimes it can be useful and sometimes it can be exploited. It's good to have as a limiter. It's good to have to frame discussions, but it's not the same as regular law. Regular law that we create through a political process that has an enforcement mechanism and that we all obey. International law is somewhat different in its origins and in its implementation. So it's a nice discussion point, but we shouldn't treat it as though it's completely objective, and we shouldn't treat it as though it's completely enforceable, and that the rulings of these courts that are composed of people that we didn't appoint or never voted for have anything to do with us. So, it's almost like a nice way to frame a discussion, but it doesn't have the same strength as our normal law. And, calling it international law, it might even be a misnomer, but it is important. If the United States, for example, signs on to a treaty, then it does have more force over us, and we're signatories to the Genocide Convention, for example, and we should be bound by the international laws that we agree to. And in that respect, yes.
So Bruce, What
Yeah.
about the hypocrisy of protesters?
Well, they're very selective, like it's always true that you protest your own grievances, are blind to the grievances of others. But I think that's the nature of the species. People always feel the things that are targeting them as worthy of condemnation, but the history is as soon as they get the power, they do what they were protesting against as soon as they had the authority. So, we had the Sermon on the Mount, and then they decided with the Roman Empire went Christian with Constantine, and they'd slaughter all the pagans. That's unfortunately the nature of human beings. They have a very difficult time seeing that there are a whole host of other evils, including their own, that are equally worthy of condemnation, but they're just preoccupied with themselves at the time. And it's unfortunate because it makes much of the protest very, what I would call, myopic. The first day of Arab Spring, I said, nothing's going to change because people know what they hate. They don't know how to build something where the cure is less bad than the disease. We're back at square one because they were all protesting bad things, but now they're doing the same thing before, except you have different leadership. But the ultimate bottom line is the same. I want to make a comment about international law.
I don't think you have time.
Well, just say it's like a spider's web. It catches the weak, it's shredded by the strong, and it's all captured in Thucydides. The strong do what they can, the weak suffer what they must. Everything else is a sideshow.
And that is a fact. You have 10 seconds.
This was a learning experience for me, and I love to have more conversations like this.
Paul Sullivan, James Robinson, Raynard Jackson, Bruce Fein, Louis Rodriguez, thank you so much for joining us for this outstanding conversation.
Thank you, Armstrong.
You're welcome.
Good night.
Good day. Enjoy your weekend.
Oh, great. Thank you.